After the enormous success of King Kong vs. Godzilla, director Ishiro Honda brought the team back together for another giant monster mashup with Mothra vs. Godzilla.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, Jim.
Hi everyone, welcome to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham and I am here with my co-host Chris. How's it going today?
It's going very well, sir.
All right, I'm happy to hear it. Also very happy to be doing the film we're doing today, which is Mothra vs. Godzilla from 1964. This was not one of my favorites when I was a kid. But as I got older, this hands down is one of my favorites of the Godzilla franchise.
Yeah, this was one of them that I didn't own on VHS, but was always in stock at my local Blockbuster. So this was one that we rented on pretty regular occasion. So I always liked it. It was never one of my favorites, but I agree. As I've gotten older, it's definitely these first sort of. There's a sort of first half of these Showa era films that are just have aged like a fine wine to me.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, as we go along with them, some get better, some get a little cheesier, some, every Godzilla fan knows they get a little more kiddish, and then, like we've said before, they get a little more serious in tone again. But I will get right into the trailer, and then we'll get into the plot synopsis, and then we'll come back with some history on the film. I'll give you some numbers like always, and then we'll get into our questions for our favorite score and character and everything else that we plan on doing for this one.
Sounds good.
卵のお化けが出たんだ。正体不明のマンモス卵日本海岸に漂着。スパイだ、三遊スパイだ。捕まえろ。ゴジラ現る。放射能を吐き、ゴジラ日本全土を蹂躙。マンモス卵に切り迫る。
あの卵は私たちのものです。返してください。
何遍も言うように新聞には裁く権利もなければ命令権もないんですよ。
謎の島インファント島に先行した科学人の使命はモスラの力を借りに来たんです。モスラの力貸せん。
皆さんの人間不信の気持ちはよくわかります。でもこうしている間にもゴジラのために命を落としていく人たちがいるのです。
放電始め。護衛科学人の特殊電撃作戦なるか。
モスラよ、モスラが来たわ。
世紀の大怪獣ゴジラの勝利なるか、モスラの勝利なるか。空から地上からモスラ親子の共同攻撃なるか。地上空前の一大攻防戦。世界の東宝が特殊撮影によるスペクタクル超ブラック編。モスラ対ゴジラ。モスラ対ゴジラにご期待ください。
Kurata Beach is stricken by a typhoon. The following morning, reporter Ichiro Sakai and his photographer Junko Nakanishi find a strange blue-gray object among the wreckage. Later, a giant egg is found floating near Nishi Beach in Shizunura. Professor Miuri attempts to investigate the egg, only to be pestered with questions by Sakai. They soon learn that the villagers had sold the egg to businessman Kumayama for exploitation purposes for his firm Happy Enterprises. At a local hotel, Sakai, Junko, and Miuri discuss how to legally counter Kumayama's plans and find him at the lobby. Kumayama meets with his financial backer Jiro Torahata, who reveals his plans to build the Shizunura Happy Center around the egg. They are visited by the Shobijin, tiny twin fairies who attempt to convince them to return the egg but have to escape when the businessmen try to capture them. The Shobijin run into Sakai, Junko, and Miura and reveal to them that the egg belongs to the colossal insect god Mothra. The recent typhoon caused it to wash up on Japanese waters, and destruction will follow when the larva emerges. The trio agree to help them retrieve the egg, and try to plead with Komayama and Torahata but are met with resistance. The Shobijin eventually return home to Infant Island without the egg. Later, Sakai writes scathing articles about Happy Enterprises' insensitivity towards the Shobijin. However, the firm dismisses the articles as slander and open the Shizunura Happy Center to the public. Komayama is confronted by the villagers for not paying in full for the egg and renting from their land. Torahata agrees to loan Komayama additional funds in exchange for putting the egg up as collateral. Komayama reluctantly accepts and begins incubating the egg. Miura decontaminates Sakai and Junko after touching the object they found in the wreckage, revealing it to be highly radioactive. The trio return to Kurata Beach to investigate further, but the giant reptilian monster Godzilla emerges from the buried mud. Citizens evacuate as Godzilla wreaks havoc on Yokachi and Nagoya. The JSDF are deployed to lead Godzilla to the coast to minimize casualties. At the suggestion from a colleague, the trio travel to Infant Island to appeal with the Shobijin for Mothra's help. When they arrive, they are horrified by the desolation left behind by past nuclear tests. They are captured by the natives and reveal their intentions to ask for Mothra's help against Godzilla. The Shobijin and natives refuse, seeing it as divine retribution on outsiders for ravaging their island with nuclear tests and not returning the egg. Junko and Sakai plead that the innocent are also in danger, that they have no right to decide which lives deserve salvation, and that civilization is flawed but is trying hard to make the world better. Mothra agrees to help, but the Shobijin warn that she is on her deathbed. Back in Japan, the JSDF launched multiple campaigns against Godzilla, but to no avail. After losing his finances, Komayama confronts Torahata at his hotel, attacks him, and steals his secret funds. Torahata shoots Komayama and attempts to escape with the money, but is crushed when Godzilla destroys the hotel. Godzilla reaches Nishi Beach and prepares to destroy the egg until Mothra intervenes and engages Godzilla in battle. Mothra initially gets the upper hand, but is defeated by Godzilla's atomic breath. Mothra uses her last strength to fly to the egg and die next to it. As the JSDF resume their attacks on Godzilla, the trio and the Shobijin remain with the egg as the twins attempt to make the egg hatch quicker via musical incantations. Twin larvae emerge from the egg and follow Godzilla to Iwa Island. As the monsters battle, the trio join a rescue party to retrieve students and their teacher left behind on Iwa Island. Godzilla is entrapped by the larva's silk, tumbles into the sea, and sinks. The students and teacher are returned to safety, and the larva and Shobijin return to Infant Island. Sakai asserts that humanity will thank them by building a better world. Alright, so Mothra vs. Godzilla is a 1964 Japanese kaiju film directed by Ishiro Honda, with special effects by Eiji Tsuburaya, produced and distributed by Toho. It is the fourth film in the Godzilla franchise, and also the second film if you consider it part of the Mothra franchise. The film stars Akira Takarada, Yuriko Hoshi, Hiroshi Kuzomi, Kenji Sahara, and MG and Yumji as the twins, with Hiro Nakajima and Katsumi Tezuka as Godzilla. So due to the success of Mothra in 1961, which I know you eventually want to talk about, And then the success of King Kong vs. Godzilla in 1962, Toho chose to pair Godzilla against Mothra for the following film. The film was intended for children as well as adults, kind of as a way to compete with television's growing popularity in Japan. A new Godzilla suit and Mothra prop were built, although the 1962 King Kong vs. Godzilla suit was used for the water scenes. And with Subarai's insistence, Toho purchased a machine which is called an Oxyberry 1900 optical printer to remove damages in composite photography shots. This is the final film in the franchise of the Showa era to depict Godzilla as the antagonist. Mothra vs. Godzilla was released theatrically in Japan on April 29, 1964, and an edited version titled Godzilla vs. the Thing was released by American International Pictures in the United States on August 26, 1964. The film received generally positive reviews from early and contemporary American critics, and American film historians have praised the film's themes of unity, greed, and Honda's depiction of Godzilla as a specter of nuclear annihilation and a symbol of moral judgment. So, when did you first, I know you said you seen this when you were very young. I'd probably seen it a little later on. I never watched these films in order when I was younger. I kind of jumped around and seen like Godzilla Raids Again, and then Godzilla vs. Gigan and Megalon, and then back to Mothra vs. Godzilla. So do you know when you would have seen this original 64 Mothra vs. Godzilla?
To be specific, it would, or my best guess at it, I have to think that the 1998 movie, because I know as a little guy I was completely in. I was 5 going on 6 when that movie was coming out, so I know that movie was a huge part of creating a Godzilla craze for me. You know, we had the VHS tapes and I liked Godzilla before, but when I knew there was a new Godzilla movie coming out, I know that really was a huge part of me of my fandom at that time. So I have to think that you're talking late 90s, 97, 98, 99, when I'm sort of 5, 6, 7. I have to think that in that range was when had to have been one of the days that we rented this one from Blockbuster and I watched it. You talked about not watching them in orders and things like that. Like I said, I've always had this OCD part of my brain. So if I would rent a Godzilla movie that I didn't own, and it's like a week-long rental, I would, by looking on the back of the boxes of the years of when all of the movies came out, I would have I always insisted on having a marathon of the movies in the order that they came out, just because my even as a little kid, my brain was just obsessed over things like that. I never wanted to watch Star Wars Empire Strikes Back before watching A New Hope, I always wanted to, I was just always very obsessive in that way. So I would always look at the back of the boxes, and when I would rent a movie that I didn't own, I was like, well, I have to watch all of them that I have with this one in the order it belongs so that I can get the experience. I was crazy for that.
Yeah, my Uncle Bob and my Aunt Candy, they would when I was younger, they would come down and visit, or come up and visit once a month. So when I was younger, he'd always bring a Godzilla movie, but he'd always bring, now what I realize is he would just grab one and bring it up. It would never be in order. So when I was younger, I would see them out of order. And then as I got older, I started seeing there's not 7, 8 of these, there's 25, and now there's 30. And now, so I eventually kind of just binge watched them all. I couldn't tell you what age that was, but I just seen them all. And then as I got older and started seeing that they were being released in American theaters, I would try to go to the theater and see this new Godzilla movie and that new Godzilla movie. So that was kind of how I was introduced, and I'm almost glad it was kind of that way. I don't know if I seen them in order at a young age, if I'd have been as intrigued as I was, because, the first 2 are in black and white, instead of just say, this isn't accurate, but the first one I seen was Godzilla vs. Megalon. You know, as a young kid, that one's goofy and like Godzilla's drop kicking other monsters. So as a kid, you're getting into that. So that's kind of how I was introduced to this series way back when.
I definitely, the whole being obsessed with the order thing was definitely something that happened after I was already kind of baked in as a fan, you know? Like King Kong versus Godzilla was definitely the first one that I kind of mostly came in at with first. But it was just like, once I was into watching all of them and knowing that there was just a lot of them, more than I could keep track of, that was when once I was like already into them, I was just like, well, what's the order? How are you supposed to watch them? You know, I didn't, you know, when you see Megalon or Gigan show up in Godzilla versus Megalon, it's like, okay, so this is after Godzilla versus Gigan, you know, and you're just trying to use your best like clues to piece it together, and then, you know, it's like, oh, well, you can look on the back of the box and see the years they came out, so that kind of tells you the order right there, you know.
Yeah, so I kind of got started. I can't remember exactly what box set it was. Maybe I'll have to look it up. But it was a 5 VHS set, and it includes like it was Godzilla versus like Mechagodzilla, Godzilla versus Gigan. And
is it the set with like the kind of like graphic design images on the cover?
I'm not 100% sure. I know that when you put the VHSs in there, it made like the Return of Godzilla poster.
The spines make a picture. Okay, I know the ones you're talking about, because I had when I turned 10, I asked for all of the movies on VHS that I didn't have. All the Godzilla movies when I turned 10 in 2002. So any ones that I didn't already have, I got them on VHS. And some of them were some that were from that particular release where the spines line up to make a picture, and some of them weren't. So I was always aware of like that particular set, because it irks me, because as a kid especially, is that the order that those movies are lined up to make that picture are not the order that the movies come out in, and I always put them on my shelf in the order that they were released. So I hated the idea. I'm like, why would you do a box set and have them the spines make a picture, but then those movies aren't in order? I was, like I said, I was crazy about that stuff as a kid.
So I'm looking at it right now. I typed it into Google to see if I could find it, and it was in the order you had to put it to make the picture correct was Godzilla vs. Gigan, Godzilla 1985, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and then Son of Godzilla. So that was like my first collection of Godzilla. So those are the movies, like, I remember going to the babysitter across the street, and I feel like every day I would bring Godzilla vs. Gigan, because when I was younger, I feel like that was probably my favorite Godzilla film.
Yeah, that's a fun one. It's got a 2-on-2 monster tag team match, you know. That's just good fun.
Yeah, it's like when I was younger, I was in wrestling, so it's like watching the Hardy Boys go against the Dudley Boys or something. When you're young, that was the shit. That was cool back then.
Exactly.
So I'm gonna get into some numbers early for you again. I think I'll start doing them before we get into our conversations on our characters and the actual film. So, Mothra vs. Godzilla was released in Japan by Toho again on April 29th, 1964. It was released as a double feature with Operation Anti-Hell, which I have never heard of until doing this research. Prior to the Golden Week, it sold 3.5 million tickets. The film grossed $217,000 over the 3 weeks from 8 theaters that it premiered in Tokyo. Of course, none of these numbers are adjusted for inflation. It sold 3 million tickets, or 2.3 billion yen, totaling 7.2 million tickets sold in Japan. In May of 1964, Henry Saperstein acquired the American theatrical and television rights to the film under the proposed working title Godzilla vs. the Giant Moth, and then sold the rights to the American International Pictures. which released the film as Godzilla vs. the Thing on August 26, 1964. When it premiered in Los Angeles, AIP chose the title Godzilla vs. the Thing purposely to generate curiosity, so kind of the crowds wouldn't know what they were getting into, and then to build anticipation for Godzilla's foe. Mothra vs. Godzilla has an approval rating of 92% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average rating of 6.8 out of 10. And then my last number I'll give you, which is the one I always forget, is Godzilla is on screen for 10 minutes and 30 seconds out of an 89-minute film, which roughly comes out to about 12%, which is, it's on the higher side.
Higher. Yeah, it's a little higher than average, yeah. And then, and I always like, and it's always crucial, like in these solo Godzilla movies versus the crossovers. It's like, in a solo Godzilla movie, him being on screen for 10% is one thing. But then if it's a crossover movie, it's like, well, you've got other monsters that were on screen there too. So it's all, it's always relative. But yeah, 12% is pretty high for us so far. Before we break into the specific favorite stuff, I thought it was cool that this movie is significant because King Kong vs. Godzilla was a crossover sort of at the concept level. They kind of just made their own new King Kong that was Godzilla-sized with its own kind of island and mythology and did a Godzilla movie with their sort of Toho King Kong. This one's very neat because it's a full crossover in the sense that Mothra had a solo movie with the fairy twins, the Peanuts, and her songs debuting and directed by Ishiro Honda. And then this is like a full-blown, this is just as much, maybe more so, arguably, a sequel to Mothra than it is a sequel to King Kong vs. Godzilla. So it's a sort of second in the line of crossover between Godzilla and another monster, but it's sort of the first like in-house Toho crossover that you could argue that like a non-Godzilla movie is canon and in the continuity of the series. So I like that's a cool, that's that next step in the evolution of the franchise that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you wanted to talk about the original Mothra from 1961, which we will do later. I wanted to give you a couple minutes or a few seconds, whatever you need, if you wanted to talk about that before we get into this film as well.
Yeah, it's essentially, I'm not going to overtake the time here, but it's essentially just the origin story for Mothra. It was directed by Ishiro Honda, came out in 1961, introduces Infant Island as more of a tropical and green place than it is seen in this movie. Has some wonky foreign country, Rolisica, whatever. That's sort of like a metaphor combination of Russia and America. They're the villains. The fairies get kidnapped. The Mothra larva comes to the mainland, wrecks up some shop, cocoons herself, hatches as the full-grown Mothra. Things get resolved and returns to Infant Island. And it's basically just straight up the origin story for Mothra. And it's interesting in the way that the sort of loose continuity, kind of loose canon that Toho kind of plays these things with. When you're a kid and you're watching Mothra vs. Godzilla, no one is overtly acting like they're recognizing and knowing what Mothra is. Like, they're not like saying like, oh, remember when Mothra showed up a few years ago? Like, it's not obvious, but they're not exactly acting like they don't know what Mothra is, like they see the infants and they're like, it's Mothra's egg, and the characters are kind of like, Mothra, could it be? Like they very, like if this is their first seeing or hearing of Mothra, they're very casual in just accepting like, oh, this Mothra, so it's like, Toho walks this line really well between, we want people who have no idea what Mothra is to be able to just enjoy this as its own movie, but also kind of acknowledging that there was another movie that Mothra had been sort of shown to the world before. So I always thought that was really interesting because for years I did not know that Mothra debuted in her own movie. You know, as a little kid, I just knew all the Godzilla movies. I didn't know that there were necessarily any other movies outside of it that might tie in. So it was always like a special treat when I found that out, that Mothra had her own film.
Yeah, and I didn't see the original Mothra film, to be honest, until probably a couple years ago, which is insane to me. They re-released it on Blu-ray, or released it on Blu-ray, and I finally purchased it and watched it. So I didn't see that original film until I was 25, maybe.
Well, yeah, by the time I had finally gotten around to see it, I was definitely older too. It was maybe only a few years before that Blu-ray when I got like a DVD that had it and two other Toho movies, like I think it was The H-Man and Battle Beyond the Stars, or some kind of outer space battle movie. I'm going to get roasted for not remembering that, but it was some DVD pack that had the three movies, and I bought it just because it had Mothra in it, just so I could finally see it. So it wasn't. As a kid, I never saw it. I never knew there was a way to get it. As a teenager, I kind of wasn't as big of a fan of Godzilla, wasn't following it, and then sort of after 2014, I was like, well, maybe I want to get a Mothra DVD and see the Mothra movie. I did the same thing with the original Rodan movie. Crazy
fun fact, I have yet to see the original Rodan. I have been waiting on it.
Ah, interesting. It's one that, and you didn't hear me kind of lobby or argue for putting Rodan in the lineup, and maybe this is a bit of a conversation best saved for the next movie, but it's coming up anyway. In the way that Mothra kind of is or does feel canon to these Godzilla movies, it feels like the Mothra movie sort of happened in this universe. The Rodan movie feels a lot less. It does not feel like required viewing in the way that you could argue Mothra is. You know, Mothra establishes the song, establishes the monster, establishes Infant Island, establishes the fairies, and it feels like that creature continues into this movie. The Rodan movie is really one off, and spoiler alert, there's the Rodan in that movie dies, and there's no hint of another creature. Literally, the only element that continues over from that into Ghidorah is the name of the monster Rodan, people seeming to have a vague awareness or confusion about it, and I think the mountain that Rodan emerges out of, which is not tied to any kind of canon of the original Rodan. I think the original Rodan dies in a volcano at that mountain. It's not like it gets buried there and then it's rising up in Ghidorah. Like, it's just like they just use that mountain as that's where the Rodan died, so now that's where the new Rodan's arriving at. So it's like it's a much looser thing. It's like I would make a case for putting Mothra in a marathon of these movies if you're really trying to get the full canon. But it's kind of hard for me to say, like, oh man, like Rodan's required viewing, it's part of the story. It doesn't really feel it. It feels more like a Kong situation where they kind of pluck the monster out and just drop this new version into their Godzilla franchise.
Okay. And I have listened to some other podcasts on the film Rodan. So, I mean, I hear about, like, the story and the plot and stuff like that. But I do eventually want to watch it, and then I do eventually want to do our own podcast on it if you're down for that, because, you know, it's part of Godzilla lore, so why not?
Yeah, you won't hear any complaints from me about that. Just, like, 100%, a lot of those classic Toho monster movies, like, these characters that have their solo movies, like, yeah, they're totally worth talking about, worth mentioning. It's just that there's a little bit of from my perspective, there's just a little bit of a distinction in how hooked in the Mothra movie kind of feels versus how not really hooked in the Rodan movie is.
Right, okay. I understand that. That makes sense. And round of applause for explaining that off the top of the head. I never would have been able to do that.
No, you're all good. Like I said, if you let me go, I'll never shut up.
Oh, I like, it might sound weird, but I like listening to you ramble, because everything you're saying, some of it's new to me and some of it I've heard or some of it I know. So it's always enjoyable to listen to somebody other than myself ramble about it.
Cool.
All right, so I'm going to go get right into your favorite character, or your kind of your most standout character, we'll say.
That's that weird noise. That's interesting because it's not a difficult choice in the sense that nobody stands out. It's a difficult one in the sense that this is a really strong human cast, and the main trio really of Ichiro, Junko, and Professor Miura. Those three, like, it's hard, like, there's such a good dynamic of the three characters. It's hard, for me, it's a cop-out, but I can't really pick a favorite, but I just like that. I think that's a great formula, the sort of inquisitive female and the sort of straight man and then a scientist. Like, that's a good combination for the lead characters of a Godzilla movie, and I just really like their dynamic in this one.
Okay, so you're going for a trio here.
I mean, yeah, I'll take a combo pack / a cop out because I can't really, I could say the fairies, but I don't. We'll get into that. I don't love I don't crazy love the concept of the little fairies. As I've gotten older, I like them more, but sometimes when you want the movies to be more serious, like this is one of the things where it's like we're crossing into a new bridge. The magical short fairies concept is definitely something on top of giant monsters. So it's like, it's fun. I like them. I definitely love the songs they sing, but it's like, we're getting a little fantasy here with these movies now, and you just have to get used to it.
Ooh, okay. So, first fighting words of the episode, because I chose the fairy twins.
Okay. I preemptively roasted you.
Yep. Hurting my feelings already early on.
Yeah.
No, I chose the fairy twins just because when I was younger, I didn't really care for them. I'm here to see Mothra fight Godzilla. I don't care about nothing else. But as I've grown older and I understand kind of the way the world works, they're the voice of reason. They're trying. They know that if they don't return Mothra's egg, Mothra could possibly destroy Tokyo, raise some hell, and people are going to get hurt, people are going to get killed, and they don't want that to happen, so they're trying to be the voice of reason and to help our main trio, like, hey, like, you have to talk these guys into, like, returning this egg, otherwise people are going to die. So I liked that about the film, and I didn't pay attention to that when I was younger, them being the voice of reason and trying to help our main trio kind of prevent what happened in the original Mothra, which is Tokyo just getting blasted.
Yeah, and I'm not coming off anti-fairy here, and especially like their function in the plot and them as characters, and definitely the songs they sing. Those things are all super awesome. For me, it was always just like, well, out of nowhere we're introduced to these tiny little magic fairies, and it's like it was always just a little. It's like we are far away from the 54 movie at this point. Like the King Kong versus Godzilla kind of took us in a different, more lighthearted tone, and now we're in like this is fantasy world, which it is fine. I like it. I love this movie, but it's just like, people talk about like, oh, they don't get silly till way later. It's like this kind of silly and outlandish stuff was a step-by-step process with every movie.
Yeah, you got two little ladies that are like 8 or 10 inches tall. I mean, that's a little you're going a little silly already. And then this film, if you haven't seen the original Mothra before you watch this, you already are confused if you're a little older. As a kid, like I said, you probably wouldn't pay too much attention to it. But I mean, if you've seen the original Mothra before and then you watch this, then it all adds up and makes sense.
Yeah. There's that age when you're a kid when you just kind of accept anything you see on screen, which is when I watched most of these movies. Like, it's just like, you see them and it's like, oh, those are the fairies. Like, you just kind of roll with it. Then there's like, when you get, like, you're in that middle spot as a kid where you go from accepting everything you see to questioning everything. And you're like, what are these things? Where are they from? This doesn't make sense. You know, like, you get that, like, overly child inquisitiveness. And yeah, they're just introduced kind of like sitting on a branch or on a tree outside, kind of out of nowhere, which, again, as a kid, never questioned it. But it's like, if I were to show this to like a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old just blank with no context, they'd probably be like, what is this? You know, like, this is silly, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, they go leaps and bounds beyond this. So, I mean, this compared to other films it almost seems normal.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's like up to this point, this is the silliest thing, but it's like, you know, once you get to the 70s, it's like, oh, remember those serious movies like Mothra versus Godzilla where the goofiest thing was 10-inch singing fairies, you know?
Yeah, so I'll go and get a little more serious on you for this one, for my favorite score, which is Godzilla Advances is what the actual soundtrack is called. And it's when he's fighting the tanks, and what you mentioned last week, it goes right into the bum, 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 and then it goes right into the Ifukube theme of the da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na, and it's just awesome. It's hard. He's blowing the tanks and setting them on fire, and then they're dropping the nets on him and electrocuting them, and that soundtrack for me is just something I could listen to all day long, every day. Like, throw it on and I'm going to hit the bench press.
Yeah, it's peak for sure. It's one of those great music and visuals combining together to make it just awesome. Like, that's what you're here for. That's what you bought your ticket for, stuff like that. And it's funny and interesting that theme, that opening note theme, the dun, 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 in America, this was the first film where people would have heard that part of the music, because all of those occurrences of that theme were cut out of the American version of King Kong vs. Godzilla. So this is significant because over here, it would have been the first time we heard that main theme for Godzilla. So it's interesting in that way that it's like, oh, the edits done to a prior movie kind of push back the debut of the iconic theme by one film.
Yeah, and I don't think there's much difference between the Japanese and American soundtrack for this one. I could be wrong, but I might not have heard it, but it didn't seem like there was too much different.
Yeah, as far as I know, because I haven't seen the U.S. version in a lot of years, but this is one of the least altered U.S. versions. I don't think the music was touched at all. And the film itself, there's one scene added, which is the U.S. military. It's about a 3-minute sequence where the U.S. military offers to use their Frontier missiles on Godzilla, and it's like a sequence where they then just the ships are in the bay or at sea, and Godzilla's kind of on the beach, if you will, and they just blast all of these missiles at Godzilla, and it's pretty effective, but eventually they just kind of run out of missiles and they haven't killed Godzilla. And it's a sequence that I guess was maybe considered to be used for the movie. Maybe some reports say it was maybe at one point going to be in the movie. Some reports say it was designed specifically to insert into the American cut. And so it's in the U.S. version. It's never been in any Japanese version. The whole sequence entirely is just under 3 minutes, and it's this great little action sequence, this like monster moment that is a real, in my opinion, it's a net positive addition to the movie. And then outside of that, just throughout the movie, I think they mostly just snip things like when the fairies sing, they just make them sing for less of a period of time. When they cut to a lot of like signs and scenery shots of like Japanese billboards and words and phrases, they just kind of cut those moments out. So they don't lop out notable sequences or sections, and I think they censor some of the violence when people get shot later in the movie. They censor some of that out, but really it's like it's the U.S. cuts like 30 seconds net shorter than the Japanese cut, so they cut about like 3.5 minutes of little bits and pieces here while adding in that kind of 3-minute U.S. military using the Frontier missiles on Godzilla sequence. And so, in my opinion, it's like that'd be a case where I would argue that's a stronger cut of the movie. We can say what we want about the dub and calling Mothra the Thing half the time, like that's all debatable. But in terms of the cut, the edit, like I think that's arguably the stronger cut of the movie. But that's just my opinion.
Okay. I see.
Sorry, I went on for a long while there.
No, I almost fell asleep. No.
Yeah, we'll have to start making a section for these little, like, here's the U.S. and Japanese version, like.
No, that's all right. I mean, I like, as we go on throughout the show, I like the little winks and nods that we go back and forth from the American to the Japanese and, so on. So, I mean, it doesn't hurt. And, if anybody doesn't want to listen, they'll turn us off.
Yeah. Well, and eventually there's nothing to talk about on that front because the movies either stop getting altered or get altered less and less, and then eventually, don't get altered anymore. We were on favorite song, right?
Yes.
Okay, to get us back on point, maybe you'll edit the conversation around or something. But mine is actually, as I was just hating on the fairies, mine is actually the "Song of Tragic Beauty" that Akira Ifukube wrote for the fairies, and it's that sort of slow, mournful, melodic song that they sing when they are found on Infant Island. And as a kid, that song could have like been a lullaby for me and like put me to sleep. Like I find that song so soothing and so kind of haunting at the same time that it's never going to be the main Mothra song, but I love that track. I love that song from the fairies.
Okay, yeah, and I can't disagree with you on that, because I mean, these are probably some of my favorite fairy twins, and then they do sound very good when they sing. The songs they're calming, they're almost peaceful.
Yeah, it's good stuff
for sure. And I mean, anybody that disagrees, well, you suck. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I'll give you my favorite quote or most memorable line from the film, which is actually kind of a long one. It's from the Shobijin chief, and it's when they're asking Mothra for help against Godzilla, and they're telling him, "Come on, so many people are gonna die," and what he says is, "It's your fault for playing with the devil's fire. It's no concern of ours. The island was once a beautiful place, a peaceful, verdant island. Who is the one who ignited the devil's fire here?" And I took that as super powerful. And I don't find a quote that really moves me or actually makes me like feel like, damn, like he's serious. Like, the last time they helped him, they came back and destroyed the island that they live on, and now they're just saying tough luck, handle your own problems, and we're done.
Yeah, that's a great line, and I'm a sucker for metaphor, like referring to atomic energy and atomic weapons as things like the devil's fire. Like I love it when characters speak in those kind of terms, and I love that you picked that line because it's almost a setup for what my favorite line in the movie is, and that would be from Ichiro when he says, "We too want a world where we can trust one another, but the more people there are, the more difficult it becomes. Nevertheless, we'll never give up. We're working hard to make the world a better place. Please don't be quick to judge us." And it's like it's like, this is a simple, entertaining giant monster movie from the 60s, and it's got such a wholesome kind of message like that at the heart of it, and it's nice to be able to pull stuff like that. A lot of entertainment's really cynical, or a lot of entertainment's just trying to be funny or cool and edgy, and it's like, this is like a short, sweet, simple giant monster movie, popcorn entertainment from the 60s, and it's kind of got a nice little wholesome theme at the heart of it like that, and I just appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. And those are two great quotes from the film that kind of, when you think about it, they hit hard, or they hit home. I mean, I've never had to deal with anything such as this, and I probably never will have to deal with a giant monster, or hopefully my home getting destroyed. But yeah, those are, people just saying, we've tried to help you once and we got screwed. And then other people saying, another group saying, that wasn't us, that was people prior to us. So, give us a chance and we'll show you otherwise.
Exactly. And it kind of puts it into really interesting terms in that, to the people on Infant Island, everyone who's not on Infant Island is all just part of the same group. And it kind of maybe makes people think inward a little bit, that it's, everyone has their own ways of seeing, Japanese people are separate from American people, or this race is separate from that race. And it's like, all it takes is geography or something like that, and everyone can just as easily be grouped together. So maybe why are we so hell-bent on seeing each other as all separate groups? I'm not trying to say it's a deep anti-racist message or anything like that, but it's like, just as much as there's a difference between America and Japan, well, to these Infant Islanders, you guys are all just people who aren't from Infant Island, so maybe, it's a little bit of a humanitarian, unifying kind of message to have, which is nice.
For sure. And, sometimes in these monster movies, what people don't realize is that there is a bunch of underlying messages, and you don't catch them until you actually watched the original version instead of the dubbed version.
Yeah, and I like to always call them, me and a buddy of mine like to call it the sort of the meat on the bones scenes. And the first time we ever talked about this was when we were watching Jurassic Park, and Jurassic Park's like this great, awesome dinosaur movie. But in the early part of the movie, there's a great scene where all the characters are sitting around a dinner table, and they're just like diving into the themes and the concerns and the character conflicts of the whole movie. And me and my buddy always said, like, this is the scene that shows that the movie's got meat on its bones. It's not just spectacle and action and special effects. It's like this movie has some interesting thoughts and some compelling characters and some stuff going on. And so whenever I kind of watch a movie and it gets to those scenes and those moments, in my mind, I always think like, this is the meat on the bones scene, And for me, like, this movie, the Infant Island sequence is very much the meat on the bones of the movie,
Okay, so speaking of the meat on the bones, we'll get into your favorite scene, and I'm guessing that might have something to do with it.
Yes, so I love the Infant Island sequence, but I cannot deny favorite scene is my favorite scene is certainly it's Godzilla rising out of the dirt. I know that's an easy one, and I could have easily picked one of the monster scenes or one of the attack scenes, but Godzilla rising up and making his debut in the movie, that's my favorite scene. I love Godzilla's look in this movie. It's a cool evolution from the lizard look of King Kong vs. Godzilla and into a bit more of a, he's got these kind of, the shape of his mouth and his upper jaw, it's got this kind of jowls kind of look to it that you can see where later designs of Godzilla that kind of have the sort of cat-like, lion-like features in the face, you can kind of see where that's coming from here. And it's a good design, it's a great scene, and I love that he's almost causing destruction by accident. Like his tail gets caught in the one building and he like trips and falls on another building. Like I just love that element to it, that it's like he's not even necessarily intentionally causing half of the destruction that he's causing. Just by nature of existing, he's doing damage.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely a crazy scene. Because, they're just looking out at a pound of dirt and they're like, I think we see something, and then bam, out pops Godzilla. And that is his first appearance in the film, and I did tally that as well. His first appearance right there is at just under 33 minutes, and Mothra's first appearance is just over like 19 and a half minutes into the film. So this one kind of gets right to the point too, there's quite a few, the more monsters you have in the movie, the more monsters are going to have screen time, which is great for us.
Do you happen to have on hand when Godzilla just as a quick reminder about when Godzilla appeared in the previous 3 movies, just so we can kind of get it kind of relative?
I do not, but that is something that I can start finding out.
Because it feels, 30 minutes feels, again, this is just off of the vibe, but it feels a little early for one of these movies, but maybe I'm totally wrong, but that's not a long ways into the movie by any stretch.
No, it's, that's a 90-minute movie. He appears right at the end of the first third of the film.
Yeah, which is about right.
All right. I'll give you my favorite scene of the film, which again, it goes with my favorite soundtrack, their music score, which was him going against the army, the tanks and the jets and them firing at him, dropping the electrical nets on him, and just him, again, being an unstoppable force like we've seen in the original 54, in Godzilla Raids Again. He's just a terror and a menace that can't be stopped. You can knock him down, but it's guaranteed, he's going to get back up and he's going to find a way to win this battle.
Yeah, that's an excellent choice. The cutbacks, just peak Godzilla is when you're getting the cutbacks between Godzilla getting blasted and then you're cutting back to the tanks, just nonstop firing, and then Godzilla getting blasted more and the tank cut back to the tanks firing again. It's like, that's just like, you can put that sequence in any Godzilla movie, basically, and it's right at home. The military just laying into him and not really getting anything done.
Yeah, I'd almost like to see like just a video collage of, jumping from movie to movie of him just taking out the Japan's army or special forces, or it's insane. In each movie, that's going to be a highlight of the film, is him just kicking ass and taking out fighter jets and tanks and everything that they can throw at him.
Yeah. I want to, while we're in scenes here, I want to give some shout outs. Like, this is a movie where I love some of the practical monster effects and special effects that this movie does. Like, there's a lot that really stand out. When Godzilla's, he melts tanks in this one, and it just looks really like, he's melted the power lines in prior movies and things like that, but when he melts the tanks in this one and they just like turn red and they're melting under the flame, like, that's an awesome effect. There's one part where they bomb him and his head catches on fire, which was apparently a total accident of the suit catching on fire. It was not meant to happen, but they kind of rolled with the footage and it ended up being a great shot. But there's just a lot of really, really good practical effects. I think Mothra flying, they film her when she's tangling with Godzilla. They film the scenes at kind of this like juddery frame rate, and it almost looks like stop motion animation, but it's not. And so like it gives the fighting scenes like this really good visual quality. Like, I love seeing the homemade practical effects in this movie in particular. Like they're at the top of their game here.
And that's another thing I was going to bring up for the scenes, as you took it right out of my head, is the suit catching on fire. And there's so much of Godzilla and Mothra to love. Like, early on, Mothra just Mothra's, the fairy twins say, Mothra's over there, and they look, and there she is perched up. And she doesn't look as large as she actually is, and she's only 100 feet away from the humans, and she looks, larger than a normal moth, but not where she has like a 300-foot wingspan or whatever it is.
Yeah. The scale is sometimes lost, and I don't have this fact on hand, but I believe in the Mothra movie, she might have been portrayed at a little bit of a larger scale, and then maybe downscaled a little bit to this movie. I think stuff like that is hard to track and quantify and notice, because the scale is usually never like an exact science, and you're dealing with fantasy setting monster movies anyway, so it's like, well, in this world, how big is she, and how big are these buildings actually all relative to each other? So it's always hard to kind of grasp, but that shot of her, that first shot of her perched up, that's kind of a bit of an iconic moment that gets repeated in a future movie that we will eventually get to.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Mothra shows up so much that in some films, I am always happy to see her, like, yeah, and then in other films, I'm like, did you really need her in this one, or was it just kind of like a callback to give the crowd and, the audience a little, like, there you go, like, this one's for you.
Uh-huh. Yeah, as much as I love Mothra, my favorite thing about her is seeing her repeatedly die or get blown up or otherwise eviscerated. Like, it's almost like a tried and true tradition. It's like, I love Mothra to death as a character. Like, she's really, she's a very pretty monster. There's not a lot of, like, nice, pretty looking monsters. She's kind of like a peaceful monster. But it's like, as much as I love her, it's like, I totally just love seeing her just get blasted and eviscerated. So Godzilla killing her off in this movie was, it's like he gets the larvae get the better of him, but he gets to at least kill Mommy Mothra.
For sure. And she's always going to come back, because even the fairy twins in this say Mothra never really dies. Exactly.
It's sort of this kind of inherited spirit, inherited memory kind of, fantasy concept where the sort of the soul, the spirit, the energy kind of carries on into the next generation of Mothra, kind of not a hive mind, but a sort of generational existence, which that too is a very cool concept for a kaiju, so I'm all into that, so yeah, that's great.
Well, you kind of already gave us what you thought of the Godzilla suit design, but I mean, if you want to go into it a little bit, I'll give you mine. This is one of my favorite suits by far. In the Showa era, this is easily for me. Well, I wouldn't say easily, because the original 54 is great, but I would put this suit design above the original 54s, which I know some Godzilla fans are going to strike me down for saying that, but I just love it. They kind of gave him like weird little eyebrows. I love everything about this design. I feel like they got the mouth right, the teeth, the eyes. When he's staring into the camera, he just looks like someone you don't want to mess with. He almost looks evil with them little eyebrows added on, and I love it. There's nothing I would change about this Godzilla design.
Yeah, it's definitely a good one. I always hesitate to try and pick a favorite, because sometimes I just feel like every time I watch another one of the movies, especially out of these first 4, 5, 6, we'll forget about Raids again, but the faces of like the 54 face, the King Kong versus Godzilla kind of lizard face, and this sort of face with the eyebrows and kind of the more characterized feature in the head and the face. I don't think there's a miss. Like, I really love them all, and so I don't think you can go wrong by picking any of them as their favorite. And this one has an overtly menacing look. Like, he is overtly being portrayed as the villain in this movie, and it's a great look. It's a great design.
Okay, so moving on from Godzilla, what did you think of the early Mothra design in this film?
I like it. She's a little she's not super vibrant color-wise in this movie. Maybe part of this is that, this movie's not exactly given the pristine, amazing 4K presentation treatment on home video these days right now. Yet, maybe, who knows? But it feels a little bit, this does feel like a sort of end-of-life Mothra. So it's not really prime Mothra. It's not like pretty, vibrant, vivid Mothra. So it feels a little aged, a little like Elden creature kind of a thing. But I like it overall.
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything you've said. It down in later incarnations of Mothra, she's a little brighter, she's more colorful. But in this one, she's supposed to be an older Mothra who's living out the rest of her days and getting ready to die. So, I mean, it makes sense. Like, as humans, our hair, gets gray and changes color. So it makes sense that her colors on her wings and stuff are more dull. She's got almost like a yellowish tint to her, I guess you could kind of say.
Yeah.
On a lot of her.
Agreed. And kind of, in order of release, the Mothra movie came out in 61, and then King Kong vs. Godzilla was 62, and then this was 64. But almost, if you were going to try and make the case for putting that movie in the marathon, it almost makes Mothra and Mothra vs. Godzilla like this great little double feature, because you can kind of see back to back sort of Mothra going from that movie and then kind of later stage life into this movie. You kind of see the more jungle infant island in that movie, and then the kind of decimation on it in this movie. It's like, not that heavy continuity was on anyone's mind. Like, they weren't overly concerned with like telling a deeply connected and continuous storyline. But it is fun to watch Mothra and then watch this movie, and you do get that kind of through line of the evolution of Infant Island and of Mothra herself. So it's like, just another penny in the jar for like making the case for the original Mothra over here.
For sure. And I mean, I guess I didn't really pay attention to the color scheme of how she looked in the 61 Mothra, so I might have to go take a peek and see if it looks like a younger, like more vibrant Mothra in the 61. I know due to the film back then, colors clearly look more vibrant and they can do more with them nowadays. So I might have to take a peek at that and do like a compare and contrast with the colors on her wings and such.
Yeah, and I know in some of the films there's situations where certain suits or monster props were reused from film to film, so sometimes that would contribute to them looking like, like I think there's a Rodan suit and an Anguirus suit that gets reused a couple times, and near the end of it, it's looking pretty rough. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case, if there were any assets of Mothra from the 61 movie that sort of set in the vault and were broken out for this movie, and if that's contributing to maybe a less vivid color palette or anything like that.
Yeah, and we'll get to some bad suits down the road where, you can see parts of the suit in the film just hanging off and falling off. So we'll get to some of that a couple films down the road.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
But I did do some research on one of the questions we had kind of for each other in the King Kong vs. Godzilla episode, and that was why they made Godzilla's atomic breath blue.
Okay, awesome.
And the only thing I could find was that Godzilla's atomic breath is blue rather than red or green due to Cherenkov radiation is blue when radiation is ionizing the air, which gives it visible light, the color blue.
Ah, okay. So there was something behind it. Okay, beyond pure aesthetics, and like I said, I think I theorized that it was maybe like a chemical fire, a chemical flame is like blue. So, but I mean, But that's interesting to hear that it's based on radiation as it's colored in the air. That's interesting, and that's actually really cool to hear.
Yeah, I spent quite a while looking that up. I couldn't find anything on it, and I found one place that gave me that description, so I was like, well, I'll go for it, and if it's wrong, hopefully another Godzilla fan will correct me and give me the real reason why.
Yeah, it tracks, and it lines up with the fact that his breath was always meant to be a sort of visual representation of the damage of radiation, but one that you could see. So it absolutely tracks that they went with a color that was sort of in keeping with that concept.
For sure. So, and I was thinking about this maybe down the road in like when he gets supercharged, why his atomic breath turns red, or why in Godzilla 2000 he has a red heat ray. I might have to see why they did it that way, or if they were just trying to like up the ante, you know.
Yeah. The sort of super breath in the later movies. It'd be interesting to learn about. To learn what the motivation behind that was beyond just like, oh, well, it changes color for a power-up. It'd be interesting if there's a certain specific thing driving that design change.
For sure. Absolutely. And while I was sitting here, I was looking something up for you, which is Godzilla's his first appearance time in each film. In the original 1954, Godzilla's first appearance is made at 22 minutes and 4 seconds.
Okay. Earlier than this one.
Yeah, for sure. You wouldn't think it would be.
But I think you did say that Mothra shows up at like 19 minutes in this one. So we get Mothra earlier than we got Godzilla in the first one, and then we get Godzilla later. Just interesting to think about.
Yeah. And then in Godzilla Raids Again, he shows up at 26 minutes and 4 seconds. And then in King Kong vs. Godzilla, it's 26 minutes and 18 seconds. So wow. I mean, they're all kind of...
That's interesting. That
in the first third of the film.
Yeah, it's interesting that the math... Because this is also a shorter movie than all of those. I think this is the first one that's under 9... Well, I mean, I think Raids Again is like 81 minutes. But out of the original and King Kong vs. Godzilla, those are all like 90 minutes plus, like 90, 94, 95. This one's like 88, 89. And so being 30 minutes into this one, he's actually showing up later in real minutes and in percentage time. And we both felt like he was showing up earlier in this movie. So that just shows the difference in how these movies can kind of be paced out and structured. And sometimes the weight isn't necessarily the raw math of it. Sometimes it's how the movie's structured, how interesting the human characters are, and how it's all paced out.
Yeah, and I mean, even today watching it, I was, like I said, I've been slacking this week on watching it or doing any of the research for the podcast, and I was watching it at work, and it's 90 minutes, and I started it, and I was like, wow, 90 minutes just flew by like that.
Yeah, it's definitely, it keeps a good, pace isn't always about runtime. Sometimes it's really much about the balance. You can have I've sat through some 80 to 90 minute movies that feel like a slog, and then there are some movies that are 2.5 to 3 hours that just feels like you never want them to end, and you could just sit and watch them. These things, it's all about the structure of the movie and the talent of the filmmakers, and sometimes it just some movies just feel like they just kind of move along at just the right, they have the right scenes and the right characters and the right moments at the right times, and the balance is just there. It's not all spelled out in the raw numbers.
All right, so after talking about all of this, let's get back into your tier ranking, going from bottom to top, or what we consider worst to best. In my opinion, I would go Godzilla Raids Again, King Kong vs. Godzilla, Godzilla 54, and then Mothra versus Godzilla, which I know these lists, us continuing to do this, a lot of Godzilla fans are not going to like me. I'm going to be getting hate mail.
Yeah, that's not a bad ranking of the 5. If I were to do, because I could easily see myself saying that, but the only disagreement I would maybe have was maybe I would be Raids again at the bottom, then King Kong versus Godzilla, then Mothra versus Godzilla, then 54, just to keep 54 up top. But I mean, if I have to be really honest about which movie I enjoy watching more, I think I have to agree with your ranking that I think at this point I would put Mothra versus Godzilla at the top. And I might not have said that if you'd asked me last week, and I rewatch these movies, about once a year. But I mean, I do think, I think that a case could be made that this one, in terms of being what it is and the kind of movie it is, this one kind of maybe trumps the original. I mean, I'm not going to lock myself into this ranking, but that is not invalid at all. That's not invalid at all.
No, and I early on when I first joined our Godzilla fan group on Facebook, I posted my ranking of all the films from, my least favorite to my favorite. And where the original 1954 Godzilla ended up, I got a lot of comments.
Oh, really?
Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Are you kidding me? This is the greatest one. Yeah, and when I posted it, I told people like, hey, I'm going off of my entertainment value, of how I like the films, the characters, the monsters. And if I was... Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you. You go.
If I was going off of nostalgia or how important the movie was in history, or to film, that 54 Godzilla would be at the top, no doubt. But I'm going off of, a lot of the times how I do, or think of rankings, is what are the films I want to watch first, or what is my go-to, and 54 is just, it's not one I go to, but if we're talking about historical value, then that's number one all day long.
Yeah, I think that it's sort of this, it's like a dogma in the fandom. I think it's one of these things where it's so expected and almost required that you put the original movie up top. And because of that, and because people get hate when they don't, I feel that there's a lot of people that when they do their top list, they just automatically put 54 at the top because they do not want to hear. They don't want to hear. They feel like there's no other option. They feel like they have to, and they don't want to hear the people who hate on them and call their entire list trash because they didn't put 54 up top. But it's 54, yes, it's great. It is the most important. No one is denying it. But like you said, if you're putting it in terms of what's the movie you like to watch the most? What's the movie that maybe represents not necessarily what Godzilla started as, but what Godzilla kind of became? Because Godzilla is not the identity exclusive to the 54 movie. Godzilla is a monster who fights other monsters. Godzilla is a monster who's in entertaining movies and somewhat more lighthearted movies and kind of more of a adventure kind of movies. And that's not what the 54 movie is. And so Godzilla's kind of evolved. And so if you're making your rankings, it's, no one's hating on the 54, but it's it's tough when everyone just kind of demands that 54 has to be number one. When it's sure, it's got to be up high, but it's not necessarily, my very, very, very favorite, Yeah,
and when we get to our full ranking episode where we rank all 36 from worst to best, or in our opinion, our least favorite to our favorite, I am expecting a lot of hate mail from where 54 ends up. And I mean, I'm expecting you to be it's really that low? I won't give you nothing too much, but it's
so am I right to assume that it's outside of the top 5, maybe outside of the top 10?
Yes.
Okay.
Which I know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So maybe, it'll be interesting. And again, if we're doing a 36, like or whatever, every film. I could maybe see, because I do love a lot of the newer movies. There's recency bias, I do love a lot of the newer movies a lot. I love Shin Godzilla a lot. So like maybe mine will be top 5, but maybe I'll be a little surprised at where I put 54 as well. But it'll be interesting to see where it falls. 4 movies in a sort of keep 10. Drop 5. I'm keeping all 4 Godzilla movies that we've watched so far.
I'm kicking Godzilla Raids again to the curb out of the 4 so far.
Gotcha. I feel like the cycle, the through line, has yet to be broken. Like one film to the next film to the next film, and I'm one of those people. It's like not only am I keeping all 4, like I'm putting Mothra on the side as a bonus, as a required bonus. I'm taking an extra.
I think once we're done with the Showa era, and you see what 10 I've actually kept, I think some of them you'll be pleasantly surprised, and other ones you'll be scratching your head at some of them. So it'll be fun once we get there.
Yeah, I think that door swings both ways, because I definitely, as we get into the latter portions of the series, which some of those are some of my favorite, but some of them are definitely this is why I put it this way, because you like them all, but it's like in a keep 10, drop 5 scenario, once we get to the latter half of the Showa series, like I'm getting vicious, so.
I'm 100% okay with that. Like we said, we got some battles coming up here in the Showa era. Not sure how we'll compare in the Heisei and the Millennium, but with the Showa era being 15 films and not 8 or 5 or it's 15 films that are all different in their own way. So it's going to be a good battle for the tier ranking or just episodes in general.
Of course, I definitely have at least one extreme hot take. Like per era, like there's I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is one Heisei movie that seems to get a lot of love that I really kind of almost can't stand for very specific reasons, and then there's a Millennium movie that I kind of can't stand for very specific reasons, and so it'll be interesting when we get there and have these discussions.
Oh, for sure, and that's going to be fun.
Yeah,
but until then, Mothra vs. Godzilla was followed up by Ghidorah or Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, which was released in the same year, December 20th, 1964. So we'll be covering that next week. So until then, do you have anything else for me or for anyone listening on Mothra vs. Godzilla?
No, it's great. It's one of the best of the classic era. And that's all I have to say about that. It's gold.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you. That's all I have to say. Is it's hands down one of my favorites, from the soundtrack to the monster designs. Even the characters. I've never watched these movies for the characters, but as you get older, or as I've gotten older, I've paid more attention to the characters than I have the monsters. So I do like the characters in this one.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the highlights. After the original, I think this has the strongest balance and intrigue amongst the human cast, and how they weave in and out of the monster action for sure. Like this is the best. This is the most well balanced one since the original, and you can argue that it's an overall better experience than the original.
Absolutely. Well, until next week when we cover Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Chris, for joining me. And until next time.